This week on To the Contrary.
First, 31 senators put the president on notice about health care and its impact on women. Then, should employers be allowed to offer compensation time instead of overtime pay? Ivanka and Hillary, more alike than you may think?
I'm Bonnie Bay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, President Trump celebrates a major victory.
Republicans in the House and the White House celebrated their victory in passing a law that will overturn Obamacare if it passes the Senate. The vote followed changes GOP House members say will address coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, but experts say not. It repeals most Obamacare taxes, including penalty for not buying health insurance. It also slashes funding for Medicaid and blocks Medicaid payments to Planned Parenthood for birth control and preventive health care, a move Democrats say is an assault on women.
We want this president to recognize we're not just letting you sign things in the dark of night that impact women.
Earlier this week, 31 senators, 30 Democrats, and Bernie Sanders signed onto a letter asking President Trump to stop his, quote, despicable attacks on women's health and women's rights.
Well, we have watched, since this president was elected, throughout his first 100 days, many attacks on women's health. Contraceptive rights, Title X, attacks on Planned Parenthood through repealing ACA, appointing people to cabinet positions that are absolutely anti-choice. And economic security is an issue that people across the country stood up for the day after the election. Our job is to hold this president accountable. We want him to know we're watching, we see it, and we want to change.
So Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, welcome back to the panel. Is Congress, or are Congress and the White House listening to or ignoring women's concerns in this bill?
I don't think they've seen a woman. I don't think they pay attention. I don't think they're interested.
The letter is by 30 Democrats and Bernie Sanders. Of course they're going to say that. He's fine. He's got people around him that are listening, and he's concerned.
I think so far all indications are no, this is not a priority for this administration or this president.
I think this is an easy distraction away from the fact that women have seen higher costs because of Obamacare. So this is a good effort to actually remove some of those costs.
Well, do you think women are more concerned about the costs or more concerned about such things as not having pre-existing conditions covered?
Well, I think when you consider before Obamacare was instituted, most Americans had coverage. You had maybe 10% of Americans who didn't. And we've seen premiums increase, 25% for this year alone because of Obamacare. So something needed to be done. And so when it comes to pre-existing conditions, women have always had to pay a little bit more because we utilize more healthcare services. But to increase cost across the board for men and women doesn't help the whole family.
Do Trump supporters really believe that costs will go down? I mean, it's not like a commodity like gas,
not
where the price goes up and down of a barrel of oil and then the price of gas at the pump follows it. Once prices go up in healthcare, we've never seen them come down.
But that's because you don't have competition in a lot of the states. And the first part of the bill that's passed so far doesn't take care of it yet. There's a second part after the regulations are changed. That's the next step, and then the second part of the bill will really attack the cost drivers even more. But the bill had to be passed in parts because of the way the Democrats passed it originally. It has to be undone in different parts.
This is pushing people who are already in dire situations into crisis. I think we can all appreciate the cost of things like fetal and maternal care, and I would argue, putting all of the federal mandate conversation aside, this idea that we know the impact of fetal, maternal, and prenatal care. We know it. We've seen it. We've funded it across seas. We know that our economies are more prosperous when people can recover. That we have a kind of an embarrassingly high already infant mortality rate in this country compared to other industrial nations.
Especially among women of color.
Absolutely, and in the South. And so this idea that, we don't really have any problems to fix, and on top of that, babies need to be born, but you're going to have to foot the bill yourself.
the prices will go down for young, healthy people who won't buy it, and they're going to go up for people who are older. There's going to be much more costly, and people who can't, 24 million won't get health care at all. And that's what's going to go on. And Atul Gawande said that what will be really great is that the Social Security Trust Fund will be now solvent, because so many people will die since mental health won't be covered.
First of all, let me address, this is alarmist talk.
It may be
pre-existing conditions will be covered. The fact that they're taking away the federal mandate, moving a lot of the stuff to the states to be state-based, if you think that there are...
But wait, Ann, the Kaiser Family Health Service found that indeed the $8 billion that Republicans came up with to cover...
Then the Senate will put more in.
Well, but wait a minute, but you can't... This is what the House voted on. This is not what the Senate is doing. They're two separate bodies. But why would evangelicals, who are driving all of this because they control the party now and the president is rewarding them for their votes, why would they want to not cover maternity care? Well, that's what I don't get.
Okay, but
we're going to take away birth control, we're going to take away abortion rights, and then on top of that, when you have a baby, you're going to have to spend $17,000 that you don't have to go through maternity care.
I appreciate your passion on this, but the point is, if they do determine the $8 billion is not enough, they'll put more in.
It's already been determined. They didn't do costs on this bill. And
before the Senate gets to it, it'll be changed. The bill is not final. There's several steps. And that is one of the things the president has mandated. He wants pre-existing coverage. So what has to happen will happen. The other thing is the 24 million that you talked about. They're not being thrown off. They're going to be given different options. That, again, is alarmist Democrat talking points they put out there. People keep repeating they're going to be removed from the current system, but they will have other options, probably lower cost, to be able to come back in. So don't make it sound like people are going to be cut off from having any insurance. It's not true. They had access to insurance, but not access to care, because they had such high deductibles. They couldn't even use their insurance card.
They could... that the CBO, this isn't Democrats talking. This is the Republican-appointed CBO talking.
And they got it all wrong on Obamacare. All their projections were off. We don't believe them. Can't go by them. It's not going to happen.
And I'd just like to say, because I covered the House from in the mid to late 80s, and I have never seen legislation pass that where the chamber that passes it is counting on the other chamber to fix it. Well, I've never seen that. It's unprecedented prior to the Trump presidency, and they didn't cost it out. They don't know how much it's really going to cost. I mean, this is crazy.
They do have them costing on it. They don't have final CBO costs, but again, their track record is not so great. But the thing that kills me is the fact that, again, these things get repeated as talking points as if they're true, and people don't go back to look to see what it really means. People are not going to be denied health care. They're not being thrown out of a system. In fact, they're going to be able to come back in, and they will be able to keep their doctor, and they will be able to get the plan and keep the plan that they want.
There's a question about access, and there's a question about cost. I have health insurance. I have all my career. I know several people that have it. That doesn't mean you can afford it. That doesn't mean you can afford procedures that you need.
But what about her point that under Obamacare, the deductibles went so high, like in some cases for hospital care, $10,000 I've heard of, that's a barrier to poor people created by Obamacare.
Yes, and there are things that we need to fix. I mean, that's a sort of a general understanding. This is not the way. I think that the message that we're sending very clearly is, in addition, I should say too, adding pre-existing conditions, going back to this bigger question about whether this administration is really thinking about women. True, but but the ideas of things I'm sure you've heard about, the domestic violence survivor point, and
we're working
people have been someone who's been raped essentially is going to be in a special category, and so these are messages that women and working people and working poor and people are hearing that
scaring them.
I am not going to be looked after. This is not an administration that cares about me or my needs. And you're right, they're scared.
But it's not the truth of what's in the bill.
But it's interesting.
And again, it's alarmism that's being put out there
to
try to stop the bill.
Well, the bill is an alarmist bill.
No, it's
the AARP, the AMA, the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, these are people.
Chamber likes the bill.
Well, they didn't like it.
They like it now.
So, I mean, going back to my first point, though, is that, it's a distraction from also some of the other news in healthcare that's going on. We're seeing healthcare insurers continuing to pull out of insurance markets. And in Tennessee, I believe 16 counties, they will have no
Iowa.
Obamacare insurers to offer their customers. So Obamacare was failing. On its own, because it was not a true market-based solution. Now I think conservatives have tried to put together something that's not perfect, and granted, I think we all agree with that, but they're going to be working on it.
Was it failing?
Well, it fails when the administration says to people, don't sign up. In other words, you have to have an administration. It's like the police. You can say a police force is failing if the chief of police says don't go into a neighborhood and protect you.
That would only be true with Obamacare, though, if we look at how millennials, President Obama tried to get my generation to sign up and failed miserably because, again, we recognized a bad deal for what it is.
It was working, and then when Trump came in and said it was going to fail. So, in other words, it works until you have a new sheriff in town.
It was already on its way out.
You have an administration in town
already
who says
on its way out.
And said it's not going to work.
If we just go back on the timeline and look at a lot of the insurance.
One at a time, because nobody can be
the
heard.
problem is you had an administration said we're not going to fund the help that is needed. We're not going to do the advertising that's needed. We're not going to enforce the mandates that needed. So if you had an administration that is continually undercutting Obamacare, of course it's not.
If
going to
healthcare
work.
insurers are pulling out, it's failing, and they were pulling out long before Trump was a factor. They were pulling out when they thought Hillary Clinton was going to be president.
No, it's like you have a chief of police. When you don't have the chief of police in town.
Even if we disagree about the Obamacare and the status that it's in, this current proposal is terrible. And I think that several Republicans and Democrats agree that, we can do a whole lot better for the American people.
All right, let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay, @To the Contrary. From healthcare to comp time.
It doesn't sound controversial, but the Working Families Flexibility Act is stirring up controversy. The bill, which passed the House this week, allows corporations to offer comp time in lieu of overtime pay to their hourly workers. The Trump administration supports the bill, which was sponsored by Alabama Representative Martha Roby. Proponents say it helps workers and companies respond to the flexibility that is becoming more common and demanded in today's workplace. The vote was largely along party lines, with no Democrats and just 6 Republicans voting against the bill. Opponents say, while the bill sounds like a great idea, there are numerous examples of the policy in the public sector cheating workers out of money and time. Senate Democrats say their main concern is employers have the final say on when comp time can be used, so they can defer compensating employees for overtime work.
So, good bill, bad bill?
Well, one of the things that I've heard that I agree with is that this is a false dichotomy. This idea that you have to have either comp time or get paid overtime is just not really where people are and where workers are. This idea that this is also somehow flexibility for employees, it's just not named. This is flexibility for employers by far, and we know that this is just one way. I mean,
I'm just curious, what do you see as an alternative to comp, or what are the other possibilities?
Well, people should be paid overtime. I think this idea that, you have a choice not to pay somebody, and that decision is going to be a negotiation between employers and their employees, is just not taking into account the realities of everyday workers' lives. I mean, workers are navigating wage theft, issues of time accuracy, not getting paid sick leave and other things they need. This idea that this is going to be a seamless option that we think will benefit folks because they need more flexibility, is just not based in reality.
You run a business. Would it help you?
I've run several. I've started and run several businesses. We were doing this stuff long before anybody thought it had to be codified. I've always had very flexible schedules. We were ahead of the game, giving people Friday afternoons off, having flex time, especially for women workers, comp time versus overtime. Overtime is something for a small business we can't afford. Comp time is something we can work around. And the workers loved it.
I'm just wondering if in the bill, are there limits on how long an employer can take to give the comp time to somebody? Because
that would be useful, and that would be fine. But usually it's funny because, they could take it comp time as something where they took time off, or they could agree to get paid at some point or ask to be paid. But they loved it. It made it very flexible, very good, especially for the female employees we had.
Yeah, I mean, I think for women, studies show that when you're younger in your career, you are a salary maximizer. But when you're reaching that age of wanting to start a family and maybe a little bit older, you're a flexibility maximizer. So women are willing to trade up to like $10,000 in salary for more flexibility. Yeah. So I see this as really just a way to ensure that it's not just government that's driving that relationship between their employer and the employee, but that it can be the employer and the employee
But
together.
what about to Latifa's point that it should be a negotiation between the employer and the employee, not government intervention? And third, that overtime should be part of one of the three options.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with allowing overtime to be one of those options. To me, this bill is saying there are lots of options, and employers now recognize that they have these tools in their toolkit.
Doesn't it preclude overtime?
Not really.
Well, there's two things I will say. I mean, we know that under Obama, we tried to expand overtime to millions of workers, and that got tied up in court. It would double the threshold for salaried workers. Right. And we know that when the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, almost 2/3 of the workforce were eligible for overtime, and now it's something like 6%. This idea that you have people working 40+ hours at the behest and oftentimes of their boss, and then saying, oh, and by the way, you may not get paid for that, I think is a problem. If you need more work, you got to pass it on to a part-time worker or hire more people. But this idea that I'm going to be expected to work 50 hours one week and I'm not going to get paid, and I might need the time, but I might not, is something that is taking us in the wrong direction. More people need overtime pay, not less.
I mean, let's just, 47% of Americans cannot find $400 if they're in an emergency. You're talking about people who have more money, $10,000. Many Americans don't have that type of money. We're trying to raise the living standards of so many Americans. Let's try to do that.
But and we know, by the way, Latifa, I was going to ask you, we know that women are 2/3 of those on the minimum wage.
Sure.
So is this a bill that's going to affect women way more than men because it's going to affect lower income workers?
Well, it could. I mean, certainly we know that women are more likely to be paid minimum wage. A large swath of private sector service sector workers. Some cases we have a huge vulnerable population we didn't have in the 60s, including, immigrant workers and other folks who, for a variety of reasons, don't have any negotiation power at the table, and their job is usually, sort of hanging in the balance. This idea, this is one more thing that you have to sort of take on yourself, I think is a bit much. And also, there are several states where the idea that you've got people who are making $30,000 a year, and you're saying to them, you can get those extra hours in before a holiday or before you go on vacation, and we're taking that back now and saying, your ability to work more and get more money for that is essentially a negotiation.
But missed a very key point that she raised. The reason there are fewer people that qualify for overtime is directly tied to Obamacare. Because when Obamacare went in, employers cut a lot of hours for people, kept people below the threshold where they never would reach the capability to make overtime.
Well, the threshold is related to
how many hours they work.
No, the threshold is on salaried workers that was being proposed to increase. And so it hasn't, these policies, and we know there's so many labor policies we need to update to protect workers. They were put in place to protect workers. And we didn't keep up with salary increases. And the idea that, 20 years ago, someone working $20,000 a year versus now is a huge difference in what that means for your pocket.
But again, the Obamacare tax affected each business to the point where they could not afford overtime.
All right, and we are out of time on that topic, but thanks for watching. And from working women to women in the White House.
Ivanka Trump and Hillary Clinton are both in the news again. Some commentators are saying the two are more alike than you may think. Trump's new book, Women Who Work, is a bestseller, though she's been criticized as being out of touch with the common working woman. She's been given an official post at the White House, though questions remain over how much influence she has over her father, the president, and about possible conflicts of interest involving her business. Meanwhile, the 2016 election was brought back into focus by FBI Director James Comey. He reflected about his controversial decision to publicly reveal details of an ongoing investigation into Clinton's use of a private email server. He said he had no good choices. Clinton, for her part, said she would be president had it not been for Comey's announcement just 11 days before the election. Polling data shows Clinton's lead vanished after Comey's late announcement.
That was exactly the time that Donald Trump was in his worst trouble, because the Access Hollywood tapes had come out. 12 women had come forward accusing him of sexual groping and assault. And then James Comey came out and moved everybody's attention away from Donald Trump, whose polls were sinking, back onto Hillary's emails.
With both women making headlines, one column in Newsweek argues that Trump and Clinton share similar styles. Both are criticized for being oblivious to ethics challenges, and each worked behind the scenes in the White House due to family connections.
So, are they more alike than a lot of people would think?
No. I mean, they share a few issues that they agree on. Yes, they have advantages because she had the husband, Ivanka has the father, but Ivanka had better taste in men when it came to marrying and married somebody who's faithful to her. And she does have a solid business record of accomplishment on her own. She has several personal accomplishments she can point to that have nothing to do with just simply running for office.
Do you think, as Susan Bordeaux said, the author we interviewed, that and as Senator Clinton or Secretary Clinton said this week, that Comey cost her the election?
You know, I always think it's better to look forward, not to look back. That's my view, and that's what Bill.
And she got in trouble, by the way. I think she was asked.
Yeah,
you know, who she blamed her loss on, and instead of saying, "I'm looking forward to helping more women to run,"
that would have been the good answer.
Yeah, I think it's always better to look forward. You know, I think Hillary Clinton has done a lot for women, and I think Hillary Clinton has done a lot on health care and working for women and children during her career. And I think she should be proud of what she's accomplished, and I think she still has a lot to offer in the public arena, and I'm excited about what she can do.
Should she be out there, and should she? But she said she's not going to run again. But
I don't. Well, I think, and I wrote her and said that John Quincy Adams was a terrific congressman. After he was president, he went back into Congress and fought very hard for abolition. And I thought that that's a wonderful model for what you can do. You don't have to be president. You don't have to be governor. You can still really make a difference in public life.
Going back to your original question,
or get appointed to the Supreme Court. That too.
If this is a tactic to try to take some shine away from Ivanka Trump and compare and make her seem like Hillary Clinton, then maybe that's a really good strategy. They're two different women, and I think Ivanka represents our generation very well. And maybe the left sees it as a way to wants to make it turn it into an Achilles heel by comparing her to Hillary Clinton, who our generation did not like very much.
Well, I think it's really dangerous territory to compare Ivanka Trump to Hillary Clinton on the policy end. I mean, as nice as she is, and I'm sure she's lovely, this idea that we have a staunch advocate for women and working families in the White House who will sort of take care of us is, I think, false hope. And a lot of people have sort of said, well, Ivanka's there, we'll be okay. And I think this idea that Hillary Clinton had a time-tested career before she got there, putting that aside for a second, I think there's still a lot to be said and to be seen from Ivanka Trump about what she's really going to do in the White House. But thus far, her business acumen aside, on the issues of today in this government and the Americans, I frankly don't know where she is.
Well, and Ivanka's book, we should say, which just came out this week, is already a New York Times bestseller. Why should women, the average woman, we're talking, we're not talking about people who run their own multi-million-dollar companies or who inherited hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Why should anybody listen to her advice?
Well, I think they look and see that she was able to achieve. Yes, she had advantages, but they can look for the nuggets in the book as to what could pertain to their life. There's a lot of great business books out there. Sheryl Sandberg, I happen to have been a fan of her book Lean In, which was pillared by so many people. And they say, oh, it didn't apply to this group or that group. Actually, there's a lot of stuff in there that was very good for everybody. The same thing with Ivanka. You look for what you can apply in your own life.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.